On today's video, we're going to talk about the top 10 Florida cities that were complete failures. Yes, 10 cities that simply and absolutely failed at being a city. Rather, these were master plan communities that never really developed into anything other than a wasteland of roads leading nowhere, or it was just a horrendous place to even try to build a city. That is what today's video is about. Many of these cities have actually had a lot of quote-unquote growth. However, when you look at how expansive the area that should have been growing is, you realize that the massive growth was actually a massive failure. That are huge, massive, expensive developments. However, the end result is sometimes a little disappointing. You may have seen the word Elkham in Florida and wondered who the crap was Elkham. Well, it's actually Michael spelled backwards. That's one of the developers that built some of these Florida cities. And while a lot of effort was placed on naming all these streets, where they definitely didn't put any effort into was thinking about what the crap the future of these cities would look like 20 or 30 years down the road. Alright guys, so let's start to explore these failed cities, and we're almost to 100,000 subscribers, so please join us on this adventure. If you do not subscribe to my channel, a fentanyl-laced crackhead from Pasco County will find his way into your home at night while you sleep, where he'll defecate all over your home and throw your laptop in the pool. So make sure you subscribe to our channel. Number 10 is Lake Placid, Florida. Located in South Central Florida, quite literally in the absolute middle of nowhere. If you spell Placid backwards, you get the word Dick Alp, but that wasn't a developer. The famous landmark of the Lake Placid Tower used to overlook orange fields. Today, it overlooks a grid pattern of never-ending houses that were never built. It's just empty roads leading absolutely nowhere. And while Florida decided, let's build a bunch of freaking roads out here and one day it will be inhabited, unfortunately most of these areas remain uninhabited, and the areas that are inhabited don't really induce anybody to want to move to this small Florida town. Not quite the Alps of Florida, the tower among the orange fields is really a depressing reminder that back in the 60s, there was actually something worth looking at. Today, the tower is closed, and well, anybody climbing up there now is probably a homeless person who has nowhere else to sleep. And one of the most depressing views that breaking into an abandoned building can offer you. Hey Jose, I live up here, and let me tell you, the phone signal is freaking amazing up here. Despite the fact there's absolutely nothing to do here, the town has tried many things to attract people, one of them allowing people to draw graffiti on all the buildings, and now it's called the City of Murals. Surprisingly, there's a Publix here. Not sure whose mistake that was to put a Publix in the middle of nowhere, but there is a Publix. Many of the murals depict what Lake Placid would actually look like if people lived here. Despite having a Publix, many people have found that they can't freaking afford it. We recently went to a truck meet in Lake Placid where we saw one squatted truck. Number 9 is St. James City, an island full of mobile homes in the Gulf of Mexico. While we don't know whose diabolical idea it was to put up an elaborate shanty towns of mobile homes on an island in the Gulf of Mexico, right in the heart of Hurricane Alley, we do know that it didn't survive. Despite this area being hit by almost every horrible hurricane to touch land in Florida, from Hurricane Charlie to Irma to Ian, this place is a magnet for hurricanes and for people who think it's a good idea to build a mobile home on a freaking island. Despite geographically the island needing 3 entrances and exits, there's only one way to get on and off the island, and then you still have to drive through the entire city of Cape Coral to get anywhere else. For being completely inept in a horrible location and having absolutely no practical way to get on and off this island, most of the island has remained uninhabited and it's just basically farmland, despite the fact it's in Southwest Florida, one of the fastest growing regions in the country. And it's not like this sensitive tropical vegetation puts up very well with the onslaught of constant hurricanes, and yet despite the fact it's an island, There are no real beaches here, it's just mangrove swamps surrounding the entire island, which makes the place extraordinarily uncomfortable in the evenings when the mosquitoes and no-see-ums come out to feed on the few people brave enough to call this place home. After Hurricane Ian, the one and only entrance to the island got washed away, so they had to rebuild the road before they can actually start cleaning up after the hurricane. Despite being just a mile or two from Sanibel, if you want to go to a beach from St. James City, you're going to need well over an hour. For that and many more reasons that we don't have time to explain on this video, St. James City has to be one of the most inconvenient places to live in Florida, and as a city itself, it's a complete failure. Despite Southwest Florida attracting millions of tourists, none of them are interested in going to St. James City to see what's left. Because of the rebuilding process, last time we were on Pine Island, it took us an hour and a half just to get from Pine Island Center to Cape Coral, which is just, what, a 5-mile stretch? Number 8 is San Carlos Island. The same concept. Let us build an island full of mobile homes right in the path of Hurricane Alley. This is what the island looked like 5 days before Hurricane Ian. I knew right before Hurricane Ian to go to this island and record what the island looked like before the hurricane, because I pretty much understood what it would look like after a hurricane. The sights of what happened on San Carlos Island after Hurricane Ian were so shocking that they circled the entire globe. A mangled mess of mobile homes and boats whose ever idea it was to create a mobile home filled island surrounded by boat docks was horrendous, and to this day this has to be one of the largest catastrophes to ever hit the state of Florida, one of the biggest construction failures the state has ever seen. Notice how this home on stilts that's historic was one of the few buildings that actually survived the onslaught of this hurricane. Clearly this was one of the biggest failures Florida's ever seen, and this is definitely a horrible place to build a city of this sort, but somehow they built it, and well, now they're rebuilding it again with hopes of it happening one more time. Number 7 is Keystone Heights. Again, they built roads in all directions right outside of Jacksonville, Florida, hoping that this would be a far out rural suburb. I'm not sure what they were going for, but once again, they build roads in all directions, hoping that one day millions of people were going to move to the absolute middle of nowhere. Turns out that nobody wants to build a house here, and despite the fact they scarred the land with roads and subdivisions in all directions, today it's just an endless mess of empty roads and empty lots, a site more adequate for a hidden meth lab than for a thriving community. Despite how affordable land is in the Keystone Heights area, investors in Florida just aren't touching it, and the lots sit on the market for a very long time. Number 6 is the south blocks of the Golden Gate Estates. This was a huge failure where a few houses were built south of Interstate 75, but the area was so massive and expansive that it would have literally taken like 1 million people moving to Naples for this area to have actually got fully developed. Today this area is protected and part of the Fakahatchee and Picayune Strand. Luckily, I recorded a lot of video here before the new law about recording in national parks took place. This area is now kind of a playground for the government, with what's possibly billions of dollars being put into what's called the Everglades Restoration Project, which will eventually flood this area, which should have been homes if they hadn't changed it. Even before the Everglades Restoration Project, the roads were carved out, and when it rains a lot in the Everglades, this area can be about 2 feet underwater, which only goes to show how inadequate of a site it would have been for a city regardless. But well, somebody spent the money to carve out all these roads and canals, only for it now to simply be a state park. Many years back, you could actually drive the entire area from the Fakahatchee to the Picayune. Everything was connected, and you could spend an entire day driving endlessly through these areas. Today, they keep limiting the areas you're actually allowed to drive on, and it's to the point where now you're not even allowed to take pictures in there. So every day the government takes more of a hold of this area. Every day there's more rules about what you're not allowed to do, and you wonder why today the youth has so many problems when you take away all of the natural resources we have in Florida for people's enjoyment, whether it's recording videos or going out for a drive in the woods. None of that is allowed today. Meanwhile, the government spends quite literally billions of dollars trying to restore this area back into the Everglades. And let me tell you, the amount of money that's being spent on these Everglades restoration projects is absolutely insane. You want to talk about a mismanagement of resources? What's going on in the Everglades right now? But they're smart enough to make it to where you're not even allowed to take pictures and videos in there anymore, because they know if people were allowed to take pictures and videos, they'd be showing the world how Florida spends billions of dollars in absolutely pointless projects. So first, developers spent millions of dollars creating this nightmare of a place, and now the government is spending billions doing completely the opposite. What a complete waste of resources, time, and money that could have been spent on something productive. That's Florida for you. Nothing here really makes sense. Somebody somewhere is making a crap load of money on the destruction and scarring of the land in Florida. Number 5 is Port Charlotte, Florida. Despite the fact a lot of people have moved here and that the area continues to grow, there's no real downtown. There's no real fiber to this community. It's just random grid patterns of houses. The older neighborhoods were absolutely destroyed during Hurricane Ian, and the newer communities are far away from any type of practical infrastructure, making this one of the most questionable places for a city in the United States. Despite the fact that Hurricane Charlie absolutely destroyed this area, it didn't seem like people learned their lesson as they continued to build homes that were once again destroyed by Hurricane Ian. There's actually a lot of canals in the older part of the city, and the seawalls that hold these homes from falling into the water were built in the 70s, 80s. It's an old crumbling infrastructure, and when the ground got saturated because of Hurricane Ian, a lot of these seawalls fell into the water or were kind of removed a little bit. Problem is that those seawalls cost more money to repair pretty much than what these houses are worth. To aggravate the problem, the people that live in these homes simply cannot afford these costs since they're retiring affordably. Port Charlotte has to be the biggest example of a Florida city that got built up, and then after it built up, you're like, what the crap have we created? A complete nightmare of roads that lead nowhere, neighborhoods that are lacking any type of investment, older homes and communities that are crumbling. This really is one of the biggest failures in the state of Florida. An unwelcoming place for families with a lot of registered offenders. The school systems here have even struggled to find teachers that won't harm the children. A nightmare for family and children, a place that has absolutely nothing to do, and there are no beaches nearby as well. It's actually quite a commute to a beach from here. In what should be the downtown of the city, they're finally getting their first building, which will be the Sunseekers Resort. However, that's just one single building, one single investment into an area that practically offers nothing to do. This is a prime example of how these master planned communities in Florida, even once they're complete and every lot's been built up, now you just have a cheaply built urban disaster. With no practical urban development and of course no uniformity to any of the grid patterns of the city, this simply has to be one of the worst cities in Florida. Port Charlotte, you are a failure. Do you know that? Do you know that you failed at being a city, Port Charlotte? You know, the sad part is I don't think that these people are even aware that they're a failure. They're probably just discovering this right now with my video. Number 4 is Spring Hill, Florida. Another massive disaster of a planned community in Florida that even after it was finished, you look around and you're like, well, this is what we built. So what's so bad about Spring Hill? Well, for one, they have a lot of sinkholes. It used to be Spring Hill. Now that it became House Hill, The Florida infrastructure of the aquifers cannot handle the infrastructure of the people that we built on top of it, and the houses are quite literally sinking into giant sinkholes. I'm not sure whose idea it was to build houses on the side of a sand hill, but as you can see, it's unsightly. It's hard to even keep the grass growing on these dunes. If you build your house on the sand mass, it's on a sand mass. They built a lot of houses in Spring Hill. You know what they didn't build? Any industry. And the people that live in Spring Hill have to commute all the way to Tampa or Orlando if they want to have a shot at making enough money to pay their mortgage and high car payments. Living in Spring Hill doesn't just require a mortgage, it most likely requires 2 car payments, since the vast majority of people have to depend on some of the longest commutes in the state of Florida. The area did get some interesting infrastructure projects since they know how far people have to drive every day to get to a job. I remember flying into Miami from Chicago, and you can literally see the curve of Highway 50 from your airplane as you enter the Tampa metropolitan area. It really is an impressive highway. The area has some of the highest drug overdose rates in the entire state of Florida. What makes Spring Hill a huge failure is the fact that despite many people moving here and the entire grid pattern getting filled in with houses, there was no real industry built, no real way for somebody to make a living. A lot of people that moved here were just on a fixed income, and now those properties are starting to look like the people that live in them can't afford to keep up. Whether it's the people retiring or the people living here and working, money isn't moving in Spring Hill. It's an economically deprived city. The entire landscape was used up to build houses and nothing but houses, and now there's nowhere left to build any type of industry or any type of places for people to recreate themselves. It really is a nightmare of an urban development, thanks to the fact that nothing but single family homes were built here. One of the worst planning disasters in the state of Florida has created a community that's nothing but single family homes with nowhere left to put things for people to do. On top of that, the entire region of the state is gripped in a drug epidemic. The only thing left for Spring Hill to do is to turn to a new Port Richey in the near future. Number 3 is Citrus Springs, Florida. Located in Citrus County, nothing is going on here except for single family home construction. Citrus Springs also has one of the highest drug overdose rates in the entire state of Florida, not far behind from places like West Virginia or Eastern Kentucky. This place was extraordinarily affordable, and it's that affordability that brought people here who had very little money. Now those people are stuck here, and the area doesn't have industry, doesn't even have access to bad paying jobs. It's simply an underdeveloped area, but with a lot of single family homes, there's a lot of people living in a place that literally has no options to get ahead. Affordable housing was the only thing that brought people to this place. They gave second thought to industry, they gave second thought to anything else, and that's all you have now, just affordable housing and some of the highest drug overdose rates you could imagine. With a huge portion of the population being elderly on fixed incomes, they've started to borrow their medications with the youth, and that has flooded the community with a lot of prescription. It's a completely miserable place, it's underdeveloped, and just like Spring Hill and some of the other cities in Florida that have grown, even after this place develops, it isn't going to be much. There are still plenty of empty lots in Citrus Springs to be turned into homes. Clearly, Citrus Springs, with its state-leading overdose rates, is an example of a city that simply failed before it even got finished. Number 2, I forgot to mute the microphone. Lehigh Acres in Lee County. Oh, leg cramp. Ooh, got a Charlie horse on there. Lehigh Acres is one of the biggest failures in the state of Florida. They've provided no infrastructure. The houses are still on septic tanks because there's no city sewage. Most of the houses are still on wells because they refuse to bring city water. I lived here for about a year. We couldn't even get decent internet speeds. The internet we could find was the most expensive internet I've ever had, and it still didn't function. My car insurance for 2 vehicles was almost $540 because insurance companies refuse to insure people out here because there's so much fraud. The city of Lehigh Acres, well, it's not even a city. They refuse to incorporate it as a city. After a huge event that happened in the city where people were drag racing, they got into a conflict with an elderly person and shot them. There was outcry in the community because they wanted to incorporate because of how ineffective the Lee County Sheriff's Office is at patrolling this area. But of course, the Lee County Sheriff did not allow or help, or nothing's ever being done with over 170,000 people, possibly close to 200,000 people now living in Lehigh Acres. They still don't want to incorporate it. I asked some of the locals who are in law enforcement why this isn't happening, and they explained to me how it's kind of like a money grab where the county makes a lot of money, the sheriff's office makes a lot of money because they're getting paid taxes for police in this area, but they don't actually do it. Because it's a money grab, this city will never ever be incorporated. Because it's a money grab for a Lee County Sheriff's Office and Lee County in general, they're never going to let Lehigh Acres incorporate into a city so they can actually develop the way they need to, which means if you move to Lehigh Acres, don't ever expect any type of infrastructure improvements to happen here. All they do is build more single-family homes, and even worse than single-family homes, these things right here, duplexes. This place has no future. Can you imagine a place that has 200,000 people living there and they still do not incorporate as a city? The interests of the people that live here is not being protected. Clearly, the size of Lehigh Acres and its population would denote that it should be a city. And for all practical purposes, it is a city with that many people, but Lee County won't let it go. There's just too much money to be made by not taking care of the people that live out here. Just the fact that there's 200,000 people living here and it's not incorporated as a city, and they're fighting back to make sure that it doesn't get incorporated, goes to show that Lehigh Acres really is the biggest failure of a city, because despite the fact it's literally a city, they're not even letting it be treated as a city. I believe that the people of Lehigh Acres can make it a great city, but for some reason, for some interest of somebody, they're not allowing it be its full potential. Many people have also told me that because it's 70 to 80% Hispanic or Latino, that Lee County isn't going to allow a Cuban or Haitian run city to have power in their county. So because of the demographics of the area, they're going to make sure that they hold it back as much as possible and prevent it from ever being a city. If it were to be a city, it could be like Cape Coral. It could eventually get built up, have businesses, have a lot of success. But for a lot of people, ensuring that Lehigh Acres is nothing more than what it currently is nothing more than the purposeful plan to ensure that this city simply cannot get ahead. You would also think that with nearly 200,000 people, they would have shopping centers, they would have malls, Publix, a Walmart, and now their first Starbucks for 200,000 people. That should just give you an idea of how underdeveloped this place is. A plaza was built on the east side of the city. Only 2 buildings are occupied, one from the county, the other one from the health department. All the other units are still vacant because people are afraid to invest in Lehigh Acres. So despite the fact that Lehigh Acres is one of the leading places in the country for single family home construction, it still remains nothing more than a place that will never be anything. And the saddest thing about this is that if they just simply allow the people of Lehigh Acres to make a city, they would make an incredible city. Unfortunately, they simply aren't going to allow it. Literally, most of the restaurants in the city are going to be mom and pop places, and pretty much the Americans that move to Lehigh Acres are pretty much accustomed to eating all the Cuban and Puerto Rican food as if they were Latin American, because these small mom and pop places are the only businesses that are open in Lehigh. They don't have an Applebee's or steakhouses, none of that. It's just mom and pop places. I think they're just now getting their first Starbucks. Number 1 is Marion Oaks. Marion Oaks is kind of like a Lehigh Acres to Ocala, Florida. Ocala, Florida isn't much to itself, so you can imagine a rural suburb to Ocala is going to lead the people that move there to absolutely nothing. The same problems as Lehigh Acres. No infrastructure, no things to do, but a massive amount of single-family home construction. Unlike Lehigh Acres, where it's mostly Cubans and Haitians, here it's mostly Puerto Ricans who are moving to this area. And while they are really hardworking people, they've built a lot of homes and they've built a lot of food trucks, the area isn't getting that outside investment, the Applebee's, all the other things that you would want in a suburban community. They're getting none of that. It's just mom and pop places and single family home construction, the recipe for disaster in Florida. Despite the fact Marion Oaks is growing and they're building a lot, if the city it's attached to, Ocala, is a failure, what could be said about a remote suburb in the middle of nowhere? Unfortunately, Marion Oaks has a very scary future. This place isn't going to progress. They're not going to put any investment, and literally it's just going to be another one of these places in Florida that even after it's built up, it still isn't much. And the fact that it's attached to Ocala, one of the crappiest metropolitan areas in Florida, just highlights how little potential this place actually has. Marion Oaks has a fast-growing Latino and African American community. However, the entire surrounding area is some of the most racist and hostile places in the entire state, and you can expect the people moving here to have absolutely no support or investment from the surrounding communities. Doesn't this look exactly like Citrus Springs? All these developed communities in Florida end up looking exactly the same, and they all end up doing exactly the same thing, which is turning into drug-ridden crap holes. Recently, Ocala made national headlines as a racist white woman killed a mother in front of her children who were playing outside their apartment complex. And that is not a far cry from the reality that Hispanics and blacks are facing in this region of Florida. Despite the fact they're moving here and they're trying to do the best they can for their lives, the community absolutely hates them for it. The fact that they're trying to be successful, if you look at the drug overdose rates of blacks and Hispanics in this region of Florida, it is far less than the white population. And for some of these racist people to see blacks and Hispanics doing better than them, buying homes and starting communities, absolutely aggravates them when they know that the white population here is suffering from addiction and dying from overdoses. The fact that this woman literally made racist threats to this young mother, killed her in front of her kids while making racist threats, is absolutely disturbing. And again, this isn't a far cry for Ocala. This is simply how these people feel about their African American and Latino communities that are growing and prospering, having families and having a happy life, while the white population here dies from overdoses. Then there's always the, oh, we would never do that people in the comment section, but you got a news report to go along with it. And I'm pretty sure this woman pretty much confessed to law enforcement the reason she did it, why she did it. It's not like it's been kind of a secret or nothing. This woman is straight up. If you just look at her mugshots, you can see the anger and hate in her face. You can see on this chart here how the Marion County white population is dying proportionately higher rates than the black population. And one of the reasons that Marion Oaks is guaranteed to be a failure is because despite the fact that Hispanic and black communities are trying to do something here, the white community isn't going to let them. How can they have a successful Hispanic and black community when the white people are dying from overdoses left and right? In Marion County, the overdose death rate for Hispanics is 24, but for whites, it's 71. That should just give you an idea of how disproportionately bad the drug overdose problem in this area of Florida is with the white population. So you have these blacks and Hispanics that are moving into Marion Oaks. They're not addicted to drugs. They're buying houses and starting businesses, but they have to contend with the fact that the people that are there are blaming them of invading their country, even though Puerto Ricans are U.S.-born citizens, and the vast majority of the Hispanics moving here are Puerto Ricans, so they're Americans just like you. I don't know what the difference is. I really don't. Now, despite the fact that analytically the black and Hispanic communities of Ocala are doing better than the white communities, if you ask the locals what is the highest crime-ridden area in Ocala, they all say Marion Oaks. If you ask people in Fort Myers, what's the worst part of Fort Myers, they all say Lehigh. It's this kind of built-in racism where people automatically assume that Lehigh Acres and Marion Oaks are these horrendous communities. But if you look at it analytically, it's not that the people there are addicted to drugs or having high murder rates or any of that bad stuff. It's simply that there's no investment, there's no infrastructure, they're forced to be on well water, they're forced to be on septic tanks. These communities refuse to invest in black and Hispanic communities, and then they want to blame those communities for having a problem. Well, today we're seeing that analytically the highest murder rates, the highest overdose death rates, all that is no longer happening in the black and Hispanic communities. But what we are seeing is that these communities continue to be deprived of investment and resources and even utilities by their white counties. So the reason that these cities are failing is by design. These communities are designed to fail because the counties that they are in are depriving them of investment opportunities and even utilities to ensure that these communities simply cannot get ahead. Alright guys, so those are the top 10 communities in Florida that are failed cities, places that simply are not going to be prosperous, haven't been prosperous, some of them by natural disaster, some of them by design. Others were simply meant from the beginning to be nothing more than a scam to get people to buy into cities that were really never going to be anything. But one thing is clear, that for the most part, the hardships that these communities face is many times created simply by the fact that people, when they create these communities, make sure they're never going to be anything. That's today's video. I hope you guys liked it. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, join our channel as we approach 100,000 subscribers. And if you'd like for me to make a video talking more in depth about how these Latino and Black communities are being deprived from utilities and resources and opportunities to grow, let me know in the comment section, because I've thought that would be a great idea for a video. And you know, sadly, even the poor white communities are being abandoned by their counties, who, despite the fact there's a huge drug epidemic in those counties and the white community is suffering the most from that, instead of making sure that they have resources and housing for the homeless and just opportunities to get into healthcare, mental health, so the white population isn't being faced by this problem, those counties are just worried about all the money grabs they can get, who they can get paid from, what builder or developer they can get a kickback from. That is what they're going after. So just like the poor and Black communities that are poor are being targeted by these people, well, we can also see that the poor whites are being abandoned with their drug addiction problem because they're not been given the resources like healthcare and whatever they need to get this problem fixed. I'm an advocate of helping the poor people regardless of race. You know, I'm aware of the problems the Black and Hispanic communities are facing, and I'm also seriously aware of the problem the poor white community is facing. In all these circumstances, these resources are available, but they're being misused at the cost of the lives of poor people, may they be white, Black, or Hispanic. We're all going through something different as communities, but the resources are rarely allocated to fix the problems because, after all, these counties are only looking for investments, and they're using their powerful positions to ensure that they can move up the food chain, as a lot of them are really just aspiring to move bigger, better, higher paying jobs, and of course the fame that comes with those positions. So at the end of the day, it's not just Hispanics or Blacks that are being deprived. A lot of the people in the white community are also being deprived from the help they need as well.